Now, we've reported many times on the repression of protest by the Assad regime in Syria. But last week, that repression came rather closer to home. The independent filmmaker Sean McAllister was on undercover assignment for Channel 4 News in the country when he was picked up by Syrian security forces and held for 5 days. He's now free and back home, and he's been telling our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Miller of the brutal treatment suffered by Syrians at the hands of the secret police and of his fears for those who had assisted him. You may find some images in this report distressing.
The rebellion has gone on for months, but after 4 decades of iron-fisted rule by the al-Assad family, the protesters aren't giving up now. Demonstrations have been mostly peaceful, but the security forces' response, backed by tanks, helicopters and snipers, has been brutal. 3,000 killed, 12,000 in prison, lifted off the streets by the feared secret police, the Mukhabarat. Most foreign journalists are banned from Syria, but a freelance filmmaker on assignment for Channel 4 News was inside, undercover, until last week, that is. He was picked up having just met an activist contact called Jihad in a cafe in downtown Damascus.
I got to the room where my blindfold was removed. I was placed on a seat in an empty room on my own. Outside, I could hear the beatings in a neighbouring room.
Between interrogations, detainees held without charge are locked in dungeon cells.
When they're taken out of the cell, before they move from the cell, they're blindfolded and their hands are tied. They're taken down the corridor to this, well, they don't know where they're going. The whole thing, having been blindfolded for a little bit, the whole disorientation of never seeing. And the person that you keep meeting is just a voice that you hear, and you have to see him on one knee. You're forced to kneel on one knee. It's a very awkward position to be in for maybe an hour of interrogation. If they're not satisfied with the information, you would be brought out at 3 o'clock in the morning into the torture chamber and whipped with either the cable, or there was like 100 leather belts. There was just like a big ball of leather belts in the corner.
Sean McAllister slept next to that torture chamber. On the floor, the cables they used for the beatings.
It was almost like an inch thick. They'd manufactured the end of the cable to become a proper handle, and the cable was so solid that it had formed its arc, and the arc from as it hit someone's back. It was so heavy, it was so awful, it must have broken bones. It was so, I mean, and the howling, the noise of a human being hit with that is something that just, you shiver and shake. You hear a sound that you've never heard before in life. I've never heard, and I've seen people dead, and I've seen people dying, but there's this sound, hearing a man cry is just like awful. There's nothing to compare it with.
Sean McAllister himself was not beaten. Syrian activists claim unknown hundreds of people have died in detention, though. Grainy mobile phone pictures of those rounded up before being hauled off speak of casual brutality, something Sean McAllister witnessed too.
I would be talking to them about something, or they'd be interrogating me, and I'd hear the howl of somebody downstairs being tortured and beaten, and I would be almost embarrassed and would kind of look away, or but they don't hear it. They just do not hear it. It's become such a daily, evening, nighttime occurrence. They cannot hear it.
Inured.
This is what really messed with me most, really.
The roundups and killings continue unabated as Syria slips remorselessly into Libya-style civil war. The capture and death of Gaddafi's emboldened the Syrian opposition, but the unloved al-Assad regime is more determined than ever to face down the protesters and ignore the gathering storm of outrage abroad.
My biggest nightmare, my biggest trauma was looking at in the way that they were treating their own people and imagining that could be my future down there in a dark cell indefinitely without any idea of when you're going to be released. I mean, I didn't realise exactly what they were risking until I went into that experience, and God, those guys are brave, you know. Too brave.
The spectre of Libya hangs over all this. The regime fearing the very foreign intervention the protesters now so desperately want. The activists who'd met Sean McAllister are now all in hiding. Jihad, the man he was arrested with, remains in detention tonight, along with at least 12,000 other Syrians.
Jonathan Miller on Sean McAllister's story.